The warships of the Zarathian Empire drifted through the void like predators that had long ago forgotten what fear felt like. Their hulls gleamed with the pale shimmer of armor that had never once been breached in battle. To the crews within, the conquest of the outer colonies was routine, tedious even. The subjugation of another nameless species outpost did not stir the blood. It only delayed the return home, where medals and rhetoric awaited. Admiral Kalos lounged in the command chair of the flagship Eternal Radiance, its bridge lit in the steady pulse of control glyphs. He had the posture of one who had never tasted defeat. His voice, dry with boredom, carried across the chamber. Another colony reduced, another petition for mercy silenced. This is not conquest, it is exterminating vermin. His second-in-command, Captain Vela, allowed herself a wry smile. She was younger, eager to earn her place, yet already steeped in the arrogance that defined their empire. Vermin resist with more creativity, Admiral. These primitives send miners with rifles against plasma. Pathetic. Around them, officers laughed. Tactical reports confirmed the slaughter. Planetary defenses destroyed in a single volley. Civilian distress signals jammed before they could travel beyond local space. It was the same pattern, repeated across dozens of worlds. Kalos waved a clawed hand lazily. Transmit a summary to the Senate. Dress it in whatever florid language pleases them. The Radiance has cleansed the frontier. They adore such phrases. The bridge settled back into its rhythm, officers working with the detachment of scribes copying manuscripts rather than soldiers waging war. No one feared reprisal. No one imagined a predator greater than themselves. When the next target appeared, it was described in reports as a backwater system containing scattered human settlements. Grainy images showed weathered domes on barren moons, mining rigs drilling asteroids, and a few slow-moving cargo freighters. The humans appeared awkward, fragile, their technology clumsy by imperial standards. Kalos squinted at the projection. Bipeds again. Always bipeds. Why does evolution insist upon repeating itself? Because the universe lacks imagination, Vale equipped, earning laughter from a crew. Then let us provide the spectacle it cannot. Kalos gave the order, and the fleet moved forward. The first colony fell in hours. Human defenses, little more than outdated railguns and orbital drones, were vaporized. Some ground installations surrendered without firing. The survivors begged through broken transmissions for mercy, for negotiation. Kalos muted them. His empire did not negotiate with primitives. But then came the signal. It was not a cry of anguish, nor a plea for aid. It was a transmission on all frequencies, originating from the blue and white planet the humans called Earth. The message was short, unadorned, spoken in a calm tone that carried no hint of desperation. Terran space is forbidden. Do not advance further. The bridge grew quiet for the first time that day. The officers looked at one another, confused. The voice in the transmission had not trembled, it had not begged. It had sounded like a warning delivered with certainty. Kalos chuckled softly, breaking the silence. Arrogant creatures. They lose one world and dare command us. I almost admire the audacity. Vela smirked. Perhaps they think defiance will amuse us into sparing them. Then let us not disappoint. Kalos gestured to the helm. Plot course for their heart world. If they wish to posture, let them do, so while their skies burn. As the fleet set its coordinates, Kalos studied the frozen image of Earth on the holoscreen. The planet seemed unremarkable compared to the jewel worlds of the Empire, cloud banks swirling across oceans, continents scarred with cities that looked fragile from orbit. Yet something in the human's voice lingered, like the faint echo of a melody remembered but not placed. He dismissed it with a flicker of disdain. The Empire had faced countless species, and none had posed more than a temporary obstacle. Why should these be different? That night cycle, as the Eternal Radiance sailed through the void, some officers whispered about the human transmission. A few mocked it openly. Others, more cautious, admitted discomfort. It was not the words themselves, but the tone, serene, almost clinical. As though humanity had not threatened but promised. Kalos slept soundly, untroubled. Yet Captain Vela remained awake in her quarters, replaying the recording. Something about the calmness gnawed at her pride. When enemies screamed, she understood them. When they begged, she dismissed them. But when they warned in that level, measured voice, it unsettled her. The fleet reached the next human outpost, a settlement clinging to a rocky moon. Resistance was negligible. Still, when the garrison surrendered, one of their leaders looked into the broadcast camera with steady eyes and repeated the words, "Terran space is forbidden." The soldiers laughed at the defiance. But the repetition began to form a pattern, like a chorus repeated across the frontier. Kalos, annoyed, demanded silence on the bridge. Do not mistake a dying species' bravado for strength. Tomorrow they will be ash. He leaned forward, claws tapping the arm of his chair. The Senate grows impatient for trophies. If these Terrans wish to be remembered for their final words, then we shall carve them into their gravestones. Set course. Earth will learn humility. Orders rippled through the fleet. Engines flared, drives ignited, and the Zerathian armada stretched into formation like a blade about to strike. Behind the Admiral's words lay the same certainty that had guided the Empire for centuries, that victory was inevitable, that no foe could surprise them, that arrogance was not a weakness, but a birthright. The void swallowed their advance, carrying them closer to the world that had spoken so calmly, so dangerously. And in that stillness before contact, no one aboard the flagship could yet grasp the truth. They had crossed a threshold from which the Empire would never return. The last words of the section belonged to the echo of the transmission, still lingering in the communications logs. Terran space is forbidden. Do not advance further. The crew laughed at it once more, but the laughter did not last as long this time. The Zerathian fleet advanced deeper, confident in the inevitability of its triumph. What they found, however, did not match their expectations. The first mining colony they reached appeared abandoned. Docking bays were empty, habitation domes hollowed, power systems shut down. No defenders rose to meet them, no pleas for mercy spilled across the channels. It was as though the humans had packed their belongings and slipped into the void before the fleet's arrival. Admiral Kalos regarded the empty structures with irritation rather than suspicion. Cowards. They flee before we arrive. He gestured impatiently at the tactical screens. Destroy the remnants. Wipe away this insult. But as plasma fire consumed the settlement, Captain Vela's eyes lingered on the ruins. The buildings were dismantled with precision, machinery stripped rather than abandoned. Not the hurried retreat of the desperate, but something deliberate, calculated. Admiral, she said carefully, they did not flee. They removed what was valuable and left nothing for us. They wanted us to see this. Kalos dismissed the thought with a wave of his claw. You overanalyze. They are scavengers who understand their inferiority. Their strategy is irrelevance. Our victory is inevitable. Yet unease began to seed itself among the lower officers. The second outpost was the same. Empty, evacuated, stripped clean. The third was littered with decoy transmissions, automated signals designed to mimic life. It wasted hours of the fleet's time before technicians realized there were no humans present. Each discovery carried with it a subtle shift in atmosphere, the kind that no official report would record. For the first time, the Empire's war machine was not dictating the tempo. It was chasing phantoms. The change came abruptly. A small task group of Zerathian destroyers, dispatched to scout an asteroid cluster, vanished without a distress call. Their signals cut off mid-transmission, as though the void itself had swallowed them. When Kalos demanded answers, the surviving scouts reported sudden detonations, hulls pierced by invisible weapons, enemies that emerged and retreated before sensors could lock on. Vela watched the Admiral's jaw tighten. Not cowards, she murmured, hunters. Kalos snapped at her. They are vermin playing tricks. Nothing more. But when the fleet advanced again, the humans appeared. Their ships were not grand, not ornate like the Empire's. They were angular, practical, devoid of decoration. Painted black to disappear into the void, they struck without declaration. A human vessel would appear on sensors, fire a precise volley that gutted a destroyer, and vanish through some distortion in space before the Empire's ships could turn. Kalos barked orders, and the fleet retaliated with overwhelming firepower, but was like swinging a blade at shadows. Again and again, human attacks came from angles that should have been impossible, as though they knew exactly where the Zerathians would be seconds before they arrived. On the bridge, Vela felt her stomach knot. The humans did not gloat. They did not broadcast threats. They did not taunt their enemies with promises of glory. Each engagement was cold, efficient, executed with surgical precision. And with each loss, she saw her crew's confidence erode, though Kalos still snarled with denial. A fragment of human communication was intercepted, a short exchange between fleets. It was not encrypted with complexity. It was almost as though they wanted the Empire to hear it. Confirmed. Fleet B has dismantled another decoy site. Continue to withdraw. Phase 2 ready. Kalos crushed the armrest of his chair with a claw. Phase 2. They dare speak of phases as though we are pieces in their game. For the first time, there was no laughter among the officers. The calmness of the human voice unsettled them more than any display of defiance could have. Later, in the solitude of his quarters, Kalos accessed the intelligence archives stolen from the human colonies. It was filled with cultural relics, broadcasts, fragments of their history. At first, he skimmed with disinterest, primitive dramas, crude music, simplistic artwork. But then, he found the records of human warfare. Footage flickered across his display. Endless lines of soldiers marching into trenches, artillery raining fire across mud-choked battlefields. Cities reduced to ash by firebombs. A blinding flash, followed by the mushroom cloud of a nuclear detonation that consumed everything in sight. Then came wars of machines, tanks rolling across deserts, jets dropping payloads, drones striking unseen. His mandibles clenched as he watched. The humans had not stumbled upon violence reluctantly. They had cultivated it, refined it, lived within its shadow for thousands of years. When Vela entered, she found him staring at the screen, his posture rigid. "You see it now," she said quietly. Kalos shut off the display with a violent gesture. "Savages. Nothing more." "Savages who have been perfecting war long before they touch the stars," she countered. "Admiral, they are not improvising. They are rehearsing. We are not the hunters here. We are the prey." For a long moment, Kalos said nothing. His pride warred with the unease growing in his chest. Finally, he snapped, "Enough. Prepare the fleet. We will remind them what it means to defy the Empire." But Vela left the chamber with a grim expression. She had seen the look in his eyes. Beneath the veneer of arrogance, Kalos was shaken. He would never admit it, but the calm voice of the humans, the silent precision of their attacks, the sheer weight of their history, all of it had begun to gnaw at his certainty. The next battle confirmed her fears. The humans did not engage the main fleet directly. Instead, they struck at supply convoys, disabled communications relays, severed the chain of command. Every countermeasure Kalos ordered was anticipated. The humans moved as though they knew the Empire's playbook, as though every tactic had been studied and dismantled before the first shot was fired. As losses mounted, Kalos raged, but rage could not restore the balance of power. The officers grew quiet, waiting for orders with the unease of those who sensed their commander no longer guided events, but merely reacted to them. And always in the background, the same phrase returned. It appeared in coded signals, in intercepted transmissions, even whispered by captured prisoners before they died. "Terran space is forbidden." By the time the fleet limped into a temporary holding pattern, their admiral pacing the bridge like a caged beast, the words no longer sounded like arrogance. They sounded like prophecy. The officers avoided one another's eyes, each carrying the same unspoken question. If the humans had prepared for this, if they had waited until now to reveal their strength, what else were they still hiding? The silence stretched. Vela looked at her commander, then at the stars ahead. She knew with chilling certainty that they were no longer marching into conquest. They were walking into a design shaped long before they had arrived, one that would not end as Kalos believed. And for the first time in her career, she did not want to know what awaited them. The Senate chamber was a monument to the Empire's self-certainty. Marble pillars soared above the assembly floor, etched with victories long past, while jeweled banners proclaimed the destiny of a people who believed themselves chosen to rule the stars. The air shimmered with the hum of translation fields, each delegate's voice magnified into the roar of collective arrogance. Reports from a frontier had reached them, fragments of battles lost and fleets ambushed. Yet to those ensconced in the heart of power, such news seemed inconceivable. Admiral Kalos stood before them, his posture as rigid as the ceremonial armor he wore. He presented the evidence without flourish, records of destroyed convoys, tactical logs of human ambushes, the chilling phrase that repeated across every channel, "Terran space is forbidden." His voice carried urgency, but beneath it clung the iron thread of frustration. "We are no longer facing prey. We are entangled in a stratagem of predators who have studied us, who are dismantling our forces piece by piece. To continue without restraint is to invite annihilation." The Senate erupted in laughter. Elder statesmen leaned back in their thrones, their jeweled robes gleaming. One of them, Counselor Drexen, sneered down from his dais. "You come here defeated, Admiral, and expect us to believe these primitives pose a threat to the eternal empire? You mistake embarrassment for danger. You mistake your own failures for strategy. Kalos bristled but held his ground. With respect, counselor, I have fought countless foes. None have fought with such precision. They abandon colonies to lure us, dismantle infrastructure to deny us spoils, and strike not at our pride, but at our lifelines. They know us. They understand us. This is no accident. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some senators shifted uneasily, though most masked it behind disdain. Vela, standing at Kalos' side, scanned the room. She saw the same disease of arrogance infecting them all. Here, far from the frontier, the humans remained abstractions, not predators waiting at the door. Another senator rose, voice dripping with sarcasm. Perhaps the Admiral wishes us to sue for peace with these, what do they call themselves? Humans? Should we grovel before creatures who cannot even clothe themselves in proper metals? Laughter swelled again, the kind that fed upon itself. Vela clenched her fists, but said nothing. She understood the Senate better than Kalos did. Pride had calcified into blindness. When the chamber finally quieted, Kalos' tone hardened. You mock, but the frontier burns. Our fleets dwindle. Supply lines collapse. If you continue to dismiss this threat, there will be no empire left to adorn with your pride. Drexen's smile sharpened. Then crush them, Admiral. Or perhaps yield your command to one who still remembers how. The dismissal stung, and Kalos felt the eyes of the chamber upon him. He bowed stiffly, every gesture forced through gritted teeth. As you command, he said, though his mind seethed with unspoken words. Later, back aboard the Eternal Radiance, silence reigned. Officers worked their stations with mechanical obedience, but their gazes betrayed doubt. They had heard the Senate's mockery. They had seen their admiral stripped of credibility. Kalos paced the bridge, rage boiling beneath his composure. Vela broke the quiet. They will not believe until the humans stand at their gates. He turned sharply, and by then it will be too late. For the first time, his voice carried not just anger, but the shadow of fear. She studied him, recognizing the cracks widening in his certainty. Admiral, you asked them to see what you have seen. They refused. So we must decide, will we continue to fight their war, or begin to fight our own? He stopped pacing, staring out at the stars. Once, they had seemed like trophies awaiting collection. Now they glared like watchful eyes. Reports came in with grim regularity. Another shipyard gone. Another convoy ambushed. Human fleets appearing where they should not, vanishing before counterattack. Entire sectors grew dark, their communications severed. The more the Empire tried to project power, the more brittle it became. Kalos called his senior officers together. Around the table, faces were drawn, pride replaced by unease. We face not barbarians, he said, but a foe who makes no mistakes. They waste nothing. They reveal only what they wish us to see. Every battle, every ambush, every silence, deliberate. We are playing their game, not ours. An older commander protested weakly. But Admiral, surely our numbers. Numbers mean nothing when each is reduced to ash before it can be brought to bear. Kalos' voice cut like a blade. They strike with efficiency we cannot match, and they do so without arrogance, without fear. That is their strength. Vela leaned forward. Then we must learn from them. Adapt. Or accept the end of the Empire as we know it. The words hung heavy in the chamber. None dared to speak them aloud, but every officer knew the truth. The end was no longer unthinkable. The next encounter with human fleets confirmed it. Kalos had mustered reinforcements, hundreds of ships gathered in formation. It was meant to be a show of overwhelming strength, a statement to reassure both his crew and the Senate. But when the battle began, the humans did not meet them head-on. Instead, wormholes opened across the battlefield, swallowing ships whole. Autonomous drones swarmed through the Empire's lines, striking engines and reactors with unerring accuracy. Guerrilla attacks on occupied planets flared simultaneously, coordinated with terrifying precision. It was not a battle. It was disassembly. Kalos watched his tactical displays bleed red. Entire squadrons disappeared in minutes. Commanders screamed for orders, but there were none to give. Every countermeasure had already been anticipated. It was as if the humans had rehearsed this very moment, line by line, move by move. On the bridge, officers worked in grim silence, their discipline fraying under the weight of inevitability. Vela felt it like a weight on her chest, the Empire's pride, shattered not with a roar, but with quiet, merciless efficiency. When the last human ship vanished back into the void, Kalos stood frozen. His claws dug grooves into the armrests of his chair, but his voice was hollow. They are ghosts. They are everywhere and nowhere. No one contradicted him. The crew sat in silence, unwilling to look at one another, unwilling to speak the fear they all carried. Later, alone in his quarters, Kalos replayed the human warning once more. The calm voice filled the chamber, as if it had been recorded for this exact moment. Terran space is forbidden. Do not advance further. For the first time, he did not scoff. He did not sneer. He only listened, and felt the weight of a truth too heavy for pride to deny. The Empire had thought itself eternal. But eternity was crumbling, piece by piece, under the steady hand of a species that had never stopped preparing for the worst. And as Kalos stared into the darkness between the stars, he realized with dawning horror that the worst had only just begun. The Empire's fleet was dying, not in a blaze of glory, but in silence. Whole armadas vanished into the black, their wreckage scattered across forgotten coordinates. Stations once loud with industry hung dark and cold, cut from supply, and left to starve. The proud lines of the Senate's banners meant nothing now. They flapped above empty halls where whispers replaced proclamations. Pride had become a poison, and those who drank deepest now trembled most. Admiral Kalos stood at the viewport of the eternal radiance, watching the stars as though they had turned against him. Each point of light felt like an eye, unblinking, indifferent to the fate of an empire that had believed itself immortal. He remembered when the stars were trophies waiting to be claimed. Now they were markers of territory he dared not enter. The phrase still haunted every report, every intercepted transmission, every dying breath of a captured soldier. Terran space is forbidden. Vela approached him quietly. She no longer carried the eagerness of ambition, but the sharp gravity of one who had accepted the truth. The humans have issued terms, she said. He turned sharply. Terms. She nodded. Withdrawal beyond designated borders. Immediate cessation of incursions. Return of all occupied worlds. Kalos's mandibles clenched. And if we refuse? Her eyes met his. They will not restrain themselves again. The words struck like a blade, not because of what they meant, but because of how calmly she said them. The humans had given no ultimatum dripping with bravado. No threat echoed with fury. Just the simple assurance of inevitability. The Senate attempted defiance, of course. Counselors thundered in their jewel halls, demanding one last glorious campaign. They summoned Kalos to deliver promises of victory, but he stood silent before them. He had seen the hollowed fleets, the precision of human strikes, the cold assurance of their strategy. He knew the Senate's bravado was theater performed for an audience already gone. When the humans struck the Empire's home sector, once considered untouchable, the illusion ended. Wormhole corridors opened within sight of the capital's sky. The Senate's chambers shook under bombardments that stopped only when human ships withdrew as suddenly as they had arrived, leaving behind silence more terrifying than destruction. The message followed, "This is mercy. Do not force us to remove restraint." Panic spread faster than fire. Fleets surrendered without orders. Colonies renounced loyalty to the Senate, pledging instead to the Terrans, whose calm words carried the weight of inevitability. The Empire's cohesion fractured. Kalos returned to his flagship not as the voice of conquest, but as the steward of survival. Vela joined him in the War Council chamber, where the few remaining commanders gathered. Their eyes were hollow, their armor tarnished by defeat. Kalos spoke with none of his old arrogance. We are beaten, not by greater numbers, but by greater purpose. They fight not for glory, but for necessity. That is why we cannot break them, and that is why we will submit. A silence followed, heavy but not resistant. The commanders bowed their heads. Even those who once mocked him had no words left. The human emissaries arrived days later. They were not dressed in splendor. They wore plain uniforms, faces stern and unadorned. Their leader, a woman with steel in her eyes, spoke without flourish. Your empire stands at a threshold. You may cling to arrogance and be erased, or you may step back and live. We do not seek dominion, but we will not tolerate intrusion. You will abide by our boundaries. Kalos stared at her, searching for cruelty, for triumph, for the hunger of conquerors. He found none. Only the cold assurance of a species that had lived too long in its own fire to mistake it for glory. And if we agree, he asked, then you will endure. Perhaps one day coexist. But know this, the galaxy has changed. Terran space is forbidden. The words, spoken now face to face, carried the weight of inevitability. Kalos bowed his head, his pride breaking not with a cry, but with a quiet exhale. Then I will be the one to see that my people endure. If survival is the only victory left, I will claim it. The emissary regarded him with something like respect. You understand fear. That makes you valuable. You will serve as mediator between your worlds and ours. It is not mercy. It is responsibility. Vela watched her admiral, once the image of arrogance, accept with steady resignation. She saw in him not defeat but transformation, the bitter strength of one who had looked into the abyss and chosen survival over delusion. The terms were signed. Fleets disarmed. Borders redrawn. The Empire shrank, not with the drama of collapse, but with the quiet inevitability of surrender. Across the stars, whispers spread. The Terrans had risen, and the galaxy's balance was no longer the Empire's to command. When the emissaries departed, Kalos stood again at the viewport. Vela joined him, her voice low. Do you believe they will stop here? He considered the question, his gaze fixed on the distant swirl of a galaxy that suddenly felt larger than his species had ever imagined. They did not want war. That much is clear. But now that war has been forced upon them, they will not look inward again. They will look outward. And us, she asked. We will live in their shadow, he said, his voice heavy but steady. If we are wise, we will learn from it. If we are foolish, we will vanish beneath it. The silence that followed was not one of despair, but of reckoning. The Empire would never be what it was, yet it still lived. That in itself was a kind of victory. On Earth, in chambers far from alien eyes, human leaders gathered. There were no cheers, no parades, no songs of triumph. The faces around the table were grim, their voices subdued. They had not fought for conquest. They had fought because arrogance had left them no choice. One of them, older than the rest, spoke quietly. We asked for peace. We gave them warning. They forced us to answer. No one disagreed. And so the meeting ended without applause, only the solemn knowledge that a line had been crossed forever. Humanity had revealed itself, and in doing so had changed the galaxy. Far across the stars, the last words of the warning still echoed in every corridor, every council, every heart that had once mocked and now trembled. Terran space is forbidden. The warning had been spoken. Now it was law,